Are you confused by all the acronyms floating around in the world of teaching? You've probably heard of TEFL, TESOL, and TESOL, but what do they really mean? Whether you're an aspiring teacher or just curious, these terms might sound similar, but they represent different pathways in the world of English teaching education. Now we'll break down the key differences between TEFL, TESL, and TESOL so you can finally understand which one is right for you. Stick around to clear up the confusion once and for all.
So, Holly, thank you for that great introduction. Can you tell us what's the difference between TEFL and TESL?
Sure. TEFL stands for Teaching English as a Foreign Language. So it's teaching English for non-native learners who are living in a non-speaking country, such as Egypt, Ecuador, China, Japan. So the students themselves, the learners, they are living in a non-speaking country. Like here, we're living in Ecuador, so the first language is Spanish, so we are TEFL teachers. We are not TESL. On the other hand, TESL stands for Teaching English as a Second Language. It's totally different in the way of teaching, the context, and everything. So it's teaching English as a second language for those for the learners who are living in a speaking country, such as the United States, Australia, Canada, South Africa. So the context here is totally different. Teaching English as a second language normally focuses on practicing the language outside the classroom. So students have the chance to practice outside the classroom because they are surrounded by native English speakers. Like, let's imagine that's an immigrant who's learning English in the United States, for example. So they are learning how to speak English in the classroom, and they are doing practice outside the classroom because they are surrounded by native speakers.
Yeah, and imagine for an English teacher, it would be a completely different dynamic. For example, we teach in Ecuador, so we break into Spanish sometimes in the class. But if we were teaching in New York City or London and the class comprised of refugees and immigrants, we wouldn't want to be breaking into Spanish. In fact, doing so would be a quick way to get dismissed from our job. And you're dealing with pronunciation errors that different people bring from having different target languages.
Exactly. TEFL is teaching English as a foreign language for those who are living in a non-English speaking country, such as Ecuador, Japan, China, Egypt, we are doing here right now. So normally students don't have a chance to practice outside the classroom, and that might motivate teachers to give them real life activities in the classroom because they won't have the chance to do that outside the classroom because let's say we're teaching like here we're teaching in Ecuador, so the first language here is Spanish, so students are not going to have a chance to speak English outside the classroom.
Yeah, and I think the terminology we use is actually important because it shows the biases or the linguistic reality which we're dealing with, because in Latin America, for a lot of people, learning English won't be a second language. It might actually be a third language because maybe they speak their indigenous language at home, like in Mexico where there's so many different indigenous languages and Spanish is a lingua franca.
Okay, so just my advice to you, if you're learning English in a non-English speaking country like Egypt, for example, so you need to find ways to practice the language outside the classroom. That might be difficult because the first language is Arabic, for example, in Egypt. So we should find people who have the same interests of learning the language, and you need to practice. So Patrick, could you summarize both TEFL and TESL in a nutshell?
Yeah, well, TESL stands for Teaching English as a Second Language. We use that when we're talking about people who are already in an English-speaking country like the United States, like Canada, like Australia. And TEFL is learning English as a foreign language,
Okay.
where people aren't living in a predominantly English-speaking country.
Okay.
Now we're going to move to the next distinction, which is TESOL versus TESL.
Okay, so TESOL, as we mentioned before, teaching English as a second language is totally different from TESOL. They sound similar because they almost have the same letters, just the O is different, but they're totally different. So TESOL is teaching English to speakers of other languages. It encompasses TEFL and TESL.
The field, in other words.
Exactly. Could you give us an example about it?
Well, it's what we've been studying over the last couple of years.
Exactly. So it normally encompasses TEFL and TESL, includes the field in general, whether the country is the United States, Canada, Ecuador, China, any country. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we're here for, is to learn how to be better teachers in this field of TESOL. And that's why we're doing these videos, huh?
Exactly. And normally TESOL is like also, it's the name of so many courses all over the world in order to teach methodologies about teaching as well.
Yes, because we want to be actualized and current in our teaching methodologies. So Holly, could you summarize for us in a nutshell what these differences are?
Sure. So as we mentioned, TESOL is teaching English as a second language in an English-speaking country. Whether TESOL, it's the general word, the main term, it encompasses TESOL, TEFL, or any teaching.
Well, that was very helpful. Thank you, Holly.